So this quote has been coming to mind lately. Like most clever quotes, it isn't a blanket statement, but it does contain a grain of truth. There are people who work for a long time, gathering experience and then wanting to pass that experience on in a classroom setting. Others are just simply content to learn and then teach and are very good at it. But there are those who just can't hack it in the real world. Used to be they couldn't deal with business. Now they can't deal with life itself, with reality. So they hide in universities. They use the academic power they amass to screw with everyday people, trying to make a mark to feel important. Here's the problem with Western society, at least if you are the SJW persuasion, also known in the Latin as the ignoramus busybodius. Most of the social ills have been solved. The problem isn't that there are unjust laws on the books anymore. It's that in a society where population can pretty much choose whatever life path they want, well, there are certain things that just organically happen. People are as good as the choices they make, and if they make bad, weird, or just outside of society norms, they're going to have consequences. And this leads to some results that SJWs don't like. Those people who make those weird choices in Western society, they're tolerated. At the very worst, they're tolerated. Many of them are embraced. They're not killed. They're not thrown off of buildings. They're not discriminated against legally, and if they are, they have recourse. But fitting in, being a part of society's norms, well, there's no law that you have to be accepted, only that you can't be bothered or harassed. Harassing requires an aggressor. If you are a trans or gay, or you decide to be one made-up gender, that's fine. Knock yourself out. But when you decide that everyone else must conform to your idea and you're willing to use the force of law, then you, my friend, are the harasser.
Political correctness.
Well, I think it's a particular kind of ideological game, and I think the outcome is twofold. It's to make the player feel morally superior and also to take rather serious axe swings at the foundation of society. And so the game is identify a domain of human endeavor, note that there's a distribution of success. Some people are doing comparatively better and some people are doing comparatively worse. Define those doing worse as victims. Define those doing better as perpetrators. Identify with the victims. Have yourself a set of enemies handy to vent your resentment on. Feel good about it, even though it didn't really require any work on your part, and then endlessly repeat.
This leads us to Jordan Peterson. He is fighting against the Canadian Bill C-16. This bill seeks to include gender identity or expression as prohibited ground for discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act. Simply put, if a special snowflake wants to be referred to as a special snowflake and you don't want to, well, you could face punishment from the Canadian government. You can make up any stupid pronoun you want within the last 10 minutes, and if people don't use it, it's a hate crime. Let me tell you something, boys and girls, about rights. Rights should never require property, time, or curtailing another person's rights. You can't take away something from somebody for you to have it and call it a right. Free healthcare is a right? What if the doctors decide that they don't want to deal with government bureaucracy anymore and they just decide not to practice anymore? How would you guarantee this right without enslaving the doctors? Food and housing is a right? How do you give that house without taking from somebody else? You want a special language? You want to require certain speech? How do you do this without shutting down other people's speech? If they don't agree, you must force them. Jordan Peterson is a professor at the Toronto University, and he understands this perfectly. After making a public protest where his speech was attempted to be curtailed by screaming snowflakes yelling shame,
and we risk losing that with Bill C-16 and its surrounding legislation. It's the first time I've seen in our legislative history where people are attempting to make us speak their language. Shame! 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 Shame!
Lawrence Southern from Rebel Media, who was covering this event, was attacked by these people.
Not smiling, bitch. What you want?
Either use the words we want or we will get violent. Notice how this asshole calls her a bitch, a big no-no word in feminist circles. There's no outcry from feminists that Laura was called a bitch. So the split is created. The privileged and the disadvantaged. One group can say whatever the hell they want, and the other can't. So what about this opening quote? Well, Peterson had a debate with Nicholas Matt, a professor that in my mind embodies this quote. This little prick is making up bullshit as he goes. Listen to some of this.
The issue of so-called non-traditional pronouns goes together with non-traditional gender identities. New York City, for example, recognizes 31 such gender expressions. In other words, besides man and woman, there are 29 other gender expressions.
Are you fucking kidding me? 31 expressions? If Canadian passes this bill, do I have to keep a little cheat sheet card and hope that I get a 1 out of 31 chance of not being accused of a hate crime?
For example, pangender, queer gender, gender fluid, crossdresser, bigendered, gender blender.
What? Gender blender? You're just fucking with me now, aren't you?
And the list goes on. And Nicholas, this is where I want to bring you into the discussion because you teach this. You teach trans studies. So if you would, give us a brief primer on so many gender identities that in your view require non-traditional pronouns.
Basically,
Oh my God, he's spoken one word and I'm already thinking weasel.
it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. And I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So,
Because you're full of shit. There are penises and vaginas all over the internet called porn that kind of prove it. There is biological sex. It's biological. It's organisms that have two separate, distinctual character traits and physiological traits. It's called sex. You fucking moron.
So that's a very popular misconception. So essentially, when in my transgender studies classes, what we're doing is looking at actual research and identifying ways that current social issues related to trans people or things that are associated with trans, such as free speech arguments and claims, how that connects to the way that people are thinking, the way that research has been framed, the histories.
Give us some of the other.
Yes. This all sounds very useful. I'm certain that if you want to have a lucrative career in auto mechanics or something that actually works or does something, this class will be very useful. This is what I mean when I say somebody can't hack it in the real world. Does this sound like a totally made up bullshit to you? Now we're going to listen to this asshole justify taking away your free speech rights.
In your view, do you think the trans community needs this kind of legislative protection?
Well, thank you. That's basically the point that hasn't been raised yet, which is that people are actually suffering huge lack of access to resources.
How exactly? Which resources? Is somebody are they not able to go to the lunch counter like blacks did in the 50s? Are they able to get food? That's a resource. They seem to be in school. They're getting educational resources. What resources are they being denied? What exactly? Can you give me a specific? Give me one fucking thing that they're being denied.
That will allow people to survive. So people are being physically assaulted. People do not have counselors that they can go to.
Physically assaulted? It's not what I saw on the tape. And let me tell you something. Don't tell me that they don't have counselors. You've made up trigger warnings and safe spaces complete with coloring books and crayons and ice cream sundaes. It's like a little daycare. I don't believe you that they don't have access to counselors.
Who are not going to, as Dr. Peterson has done on YouTube, recommend that they actually become more anxious and more upset about situations.
Become anxious and upset about situations? It's called life, buddy. And let me tell you something. You trying to take away my free speech is making me anxious and upset about that situation.
People are being assaulted. I brought all sorts of really depressing stats that people who are leaning towards thinking that this is not that big of a deal, those people need to look at those stats. But
Give
many
us one.
people...
Give us one stat.
Yeah, so 58% of students could not get academic transcripts with their correct name or pronoun.
What the fuck? You talk about assault. You say there are a bunch of depressing stats. Well, assuming that you're talking about the stats on transgendered people getting assaulted. And when he asks you for one, the first one, the best one you can pull out, is that 58% of trans people are not able to get the correct pronoun on their transcripts? This is the best you fucking got? You're full of shit. You fucking mongoloid.
That causes a huge chain of events for students or anybody who's had any kind of academic training. As everyone recognizes, we need to be able to have references, we need to be able to have resumes, we need to be able to get jobs.
Okay. So let me track with you here. If we don't have the correct pronoun on our transcript, we can't get a resume, something that you make yourself, and you can't get a job. I have he on my resume, so I can get a job. I'm okay, because they'll use he. But if they don't use the pronoun I want, I can't get that job. Full of shit.
So I want to be sure that I'm clearly understanding your point here, which is, and therefore they feel disrespected, and therefore this affects their life in a very real way? Is that right?
Holy fuck, he's calling me on this. I better double down.
Feeling of disrespect is not as important as the ways that people in authority are able to circumvent the possibilities for living. So it has more to do with not being able to find housing and therefore being homeless. It has more to do with not being able to get jobs because people are discriminated against.
Called it.
So we're not actually we shouldn't be talking about free speech.
And there you have it. We should not be talking about free speech. Only people's fifis matter. The rights that we have put down to create Western civilization, they're no longer valuable. What happens if we don't have free speech? When the founders of the United States came up with the First Amendment, they assumed it was to allow the citizens to speak out against the government, to have a free press that could keep the government in check. What I don't think they expected was the government to completely co-opt the media into their own propaganda arm, and then to have the citizens themselves attempt to control other citizens' right to speech, rights to their own opinions. And what has this culminated into?
I'm talking about. Get your ass out of here, kid. That's what I'm talking about. I told your ass. Get your ass out of here. I told you, didn't I tell you? 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 Oh, shut out, ass motherfucker. Ain't nobody
Liv, don't touch her. Don't touch her. Don't touch her. Let her be. Don't touch her. Don't touch her.
Didn't I tell you? Hey, wait.
Don't touch her. Don't touch her.
Wait. Didn't I tell you about 5 minutes ago that somebody's gonna walk by here and no, I would not defend you because you spewed hate and you got hate. You got exactly what you were dishing out. I told you, I warned you on that, didn't I?
That's right. A black, homeless woman gets beat up for supporting the wrong candidate, and no one in the mainstream media seems to care. If this were a right-wing attack on a black homeless woman supporting Hillary, it would be the biggest scandal ever, plastered all over the news day and night. Oh, come on, you know I'm right about this. The corruption is complete. The politicians have bought off the media with access and cocktail parties. People like Donna Brazil move from government to media, then back to government, and then to the head of the DNC, and the ones in the media become press secretaries of the government. They give the info they want you to see. Academics are full of professors willing to buy into this crap, willing to get more power and influence peddling this snake oil. It's not just regular people getting hurt anymore. It's the least among us. Trump as a person, he's a narcissist. He's a buffoon. He may be a good businessman. He certainly made a lot of money. But in the end, he's a flawed human the same as the rest of us. But the idea of Trump is really the idea of turning over the apple cart, of people saying no more politicians, no more people from the system, no more people who couch every word they say in focus group sentences, no more compromises on free speech. Whatever you think of Trump, and most of it's probably correct, there's one thing he does embody, and that's free speech. The good and the bad, warts and all, the better and the worse. And we need more of that. We need ideas, no matter how stupid, to be discussed, argued, and then either adopted or discarded. And we must respect everyone's right to that. Whether you're a rich blowhard running for president or a lowly black homeless woman, all have the same right.
This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.